All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started here. I wanted to welcome you all again for joining our Hitchhikers exclusive webinar, Customize Your Knowledge Graph with Entity Previews. This is one that we're really excited about, and it's at the start of a new campaign where we want to dig into specific features that we think can drive a great bit of value for our power users, for our administrators, for people that are in the platform. Entity Preview is a new feature that has been in beta and come out recently, and we're so excited to just show some of the cool things that you can do to customize your knowledge graph. And I'm joined here today by Fed Finjap and Dan Handwerker on the Knowledge Graph product management and product marketing teams. And you could not have two better guests to take you through this feature, take you through the values, some awesome best practices and use cases. So wanted to thank you guys for joining. And before we get moving on to the actual webinar, I wanted to take you through a quick agenda. First, we're just going to, in general, kind of talk about why this is something that's important to us, why we've spent time developing this feature. And then we'll take you through some key use cases that we've seen so far from different clients and partners across a number of different verticals. Then we'll get into a live demo. Fed's actually going to hop into the platform, take you through step-by-step how you actually add these new custom entity previews. And then we'll actually take some time here for a hands-on walkthrough. So I'd recommend, if you have a second monitor or you want to get your account up in a different window, this is when we're really going to have you all hands-on and walk you through how you can actually set up an entity preview. Don't worry if you don't have a second monitor or you don't want to do anything now. We're going to send this webinar out as a recording either later today or tomorrow. So you'll be able to refer back to this if you want to set up some custom entity previews. And then finally, we'll end with a Q&A with the experts. So you'll be able to ask any questions to Dan and Fed. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure that we get to as many of those as possible at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Nick. So to get it started, the knowledge graph, as you all know, is the foundation of AI search experiences. It's also the secret to how we can power natural language search experiences. So as the use cases of the Answers platform continue to expand, knowledge graphs are becoming more and more complex with more entity types and different use cases. And with all these new use cases, there's not one right way to set up and view your knowledge graph. One thing, though, is for certain: organization of your public information in your knowledge graph is key. So there are many new knowledge graphs with different industries, size of business, goals, etc. So here are some examples of the different industries and kind of like what each one focuses on. So financial services loves to highlight their professionals. So an example could be Chase Bank, could have a big focus on their bankers and lenders. Direct to consumer loves to highlight their products and services. Healthcare, one of their main focuses are facilities, so making sure patients know exactly where to go and how they should reach their providers. CPG also has a big focus on products. Food service loves to highlight their menu, want to push the food that their customers like most. And lastly, marketing, highlight many different aspects, whatever best fits their business need. So these are all examples of how industries have their own knowledge graphs and are successfully using customizable entity previews to highlight that to their internal users. So this is the Yext Knowledge Graph. And a knowledge graph can have thousands of entities. So any extra method of organization to save even a couple of minutes for users goes a really long way, especially if you have many different people, many different administrators in the same knowledge graph. So as you guys can imagine, Yext has an extremely robust knowledge graph. See 6,752 entities, over 70 entity types, and many different people working in the Yext knowledge graph at all times. More than a handful, I can promise you that. So this is where customizable entity previews come into play. Each type of entity should be viewed differently. So you can see the frequently asked questions here. You would not look at a different entity type in the same way that you would right here. So here you can see the question and answer, easily accessible. But if you were looking at a jobs or careers entity type, you'd probably want a job title and information about that specific job posting. That would make much more sense for that entity type. So it's not really a one size fits all. And that's where the customization is really powerful. So before you could only see the entity name and ID, but now you can add any field into your entity preview. I want to stress first that this is purely an in-platform tool. So the goal being to save time for the administrator, the power user, and anyone that goes into your knowledge graph. And we know that you're working on many different experiences, including AI search, listings, and pages. So you can see these previews in the main knowledge graph screen where you view entities and an answers test search. So this feature makes your knowledge graph easier to understand, and you can take action on your brand's information quickly. Now I'm going to go into 3 entity types where we've seen customers take advantage of this feature, and in addition, 1 case study as well. So the applications are endless. I just thought that I would highlight a few that we've seen brands capitalize on. So first, the professionals entity type. So this is a healthcare company, and they've decided to include headshot, office name, address, NPI, and entity ID. So I want to highlight NPI here, which is the National Provider Identifier. It's very important in the healthcare industry, and it's a unique identifier that's used often. So that's why the administrator decided to include it in the preview. If you're a recruiter or someone involved in jobs for your company and you go into the knowledge graph to see, kind of basic information about your postings, what's the information that would be most helpful for you? What can save, your whoever's in the knowledge graph time? So in this example, you can see the admin chose to include the job type, the date posted, the job location, description, and entity ID. They could also add department, salary, or years of experience required. An events coordinator might want to highlight the event time, the entity ID, venue name, or description, and other additions could be location, sponsor, or price of admission. Now going into the case study. So this is Kia Motors America's knowledge graph, and you can see this is their locations entity type. So you can see the fields included in the preview are address, main phone, and entity ID. So they actually have a few duplicate dealer names. So this poses kind of an issue when, if you didn't have this entity preview, you need to click into each one to see kind of more details and then go back to kind of make changes, any changes that you'd want if you click the wrong one. So here with entity previews, you can put in any, relevant information. So if you know the address, that's a clear identifier. So, saves you a couple minutes, and that goes a long way when you have to do a task several times. So this is an example of a search for the Niro EV Kia model in the platform, which pulls in frequently asked questions and the vehicle itself. Entity previews make it easy for users to understand what each entity is and take quick action on these items. So you can see, clearly what's a frequently asked question with the question and answer, and the vehicle itself having the landing page URL, the vehicle category, is it active in answers or is it not? Maybe they have a new car coming out that you want to keep, not active and then switch on. So that's an important identifier, and then drivetrain. So Kia implemented entity previews a few weeks ago, and they told me it saved them lots of time. We can navigate through tasks much faster now. And they have many different people managing their information, including marketers, developers, integrators. So to have the key information available just by looking at the knowledge graph, not having to dig through into each entity, saves them a substantial amount of time. So again, I want to stress that Kia decided exactly what they wanted to show for each entity type to best fit their needs and to kind of make them most productive. Just to summarize the value here, customizable entity previews are built for the administrator, the power user, and anyone that goes into your knowledge graph and is managing information. So you can clearly see all the information stored in your knowledge graph, saves each administrator a significant amount of time. and entity previews make it easier to keep information up to date, create new content for your organization, and ultimately make your public footprint even stronger. So with that, I will pass it over to Fed for a demo of how to implement customizable entity previews.
Great, thank you, Dan. And hello, everyone. This is Fed here. And I'm gonna just share my screen real quick. I'm gonna walk you through how to exactly configure your entity previews in the platform so that you guys can use them to better organize your knowledge graph, kind of like Dan showed us. So on your screen, you should see my sample restaurant knowledge graph with a bunch of menu item and restaurant entities. And just for some context here, a common thing that we see with custom entity types is that if you don't configure these entity previews, then by default, you get you just get like a preview that simply shows the name and entity ID, kind of like our menu items here. And now there are definitely times where this is fine. Like, for example, if there's no more important information to showcase about those entities, or like if your users are interacting with Yext from outside the platform and updating entities from outside of the platform through other integrations and whatnot. But in most cases where day-to-day users and admins are logging into the Yext platform daily to find and manage entity data, it's super helpful to be able to showcase important and identifying information upfront about entities so that day-to-day users can be more efficient and not have to dig into entities themselves to find frequently used data or identify what entity they're looking at themselves. So with our menu item specifically, one can imagine that instead of just like name and entity ID, it might be more useful for day-to-day platform users to see more important information about the menu items contained upfront, perhaps things like the price of the dish or some nutritional info, etc. So to set that up, I would simply configure that in my menu item entity type management page. So to do that, I will go ahead and navigate over to the configuration tab, find my menu item entity type, and hit this view details button to enter the menu item entity type management page. And then from here, once I'm in this screen, I'll go ahead into the preview tab to pick the fields that I want to appear in my menu item entity previews. So once you're actually in this screen, you'll find that it's relatively quick to add fields to the preview itself. Now in general, something to think about when you are picking the fields to include in your entity previews, it's typically best practice to pick fields that are relatively concise so that they're easily scannable. Another thing is that you also want to add fields that can help add more identifying information about the entity rather than fields that might have the same value across entities of a given type, kind of like Dan was talking about earlier with the Kia example. So for my menu items, I'll go ahead and add some fields to the previews. Identifying fields for my menu items is actually the name field, which is already included here. As you can see, it's already selected here. So I'll actually go ahead and add some other info that our field users managing this knowledge graph might want to scan for, like things like, for example, price, maybe some nutritional info like allergen. I'll include calories as well. I'll probably include the category of menu item itself and maybe even a photo as well. And I'll also go ahead and remove my entity ID, since this is actually a little bit less useful for my menu items. I don't really use this field other than the fact that it's kind of required. And so to remove this from my preview, I'd simply deselect it from this list. So now that I have the fields that I want in my entity preview, I can always hit save now, but I can actually also even just go ahead and configure this further for some more specific field-specific settings on each field. So first off, I'll actually set the order in which I want the fields to appear. So in this case, I might want my category to appear immediately after my name field. So to do that, I would to reorder the fields, I would simply drag and drop to move this menu category field up to appear underneath my name field. I'll also go ahead and actually move the allergens list field down here so that the calories comes first. Next, I'm going to go ahead and configure some of the display settings for some of these fields. And before getting into that, I'm actually going to walk through quickly what the general display settings for some of these fields actually are. The first thing here being the emphasize field value setting. So this setting actually allows you to choose a field to emphasize in the preview. So typically this is actually the name field already, like in our case, but sometimes identifying info might be stored in other fields rather than and the name field might be the same across all your different entities. So this gives you the option to basically change that and choose what field you want to emphasize in the preview. And when you emphasize a field, we hide the name of the field and make it a nice prominent blue link like you see here. So I'm actually going to de-emphasize that. One thing to note here is that entity previews cannot have more than one field emphasized. So that our recommendation here for choosing the emphasized field would be to choose the field where, when given no other information about the entity, tells your users the most about the entity. And typically that is the name field. So I'm actually going to reset that here. Some other options, the next display settings options we have here is the option to show the field name. And you can optionally hide the field name altogether to give more space to the content within the preview. And associated with this, we also even have this little use field name alias setting, which allows you to basically, change the field name as it appears in the entity preview specifically. Since it's a preview, sometimes the field name can be a bit long and might not fit there. Like for example, let's say I want to include a common thing that we see is when users include subfields of struct fields. Let me take this URL field, for example. You can see here that the field name doesn't actually fit in the entire preview column. So to combat this, I could simply set an alias here, add a new field name, and if I hit apply, you'll see that the field name changes to a shortened version. I'm going to actually go ahead and remove that from this preview. And lastly, the last setting that we have here is the option to manipulate the line height. And this basically allows you to say what is the maximum amount of lines that the content of a given field within the entity preview should take up. So for example, a common use case for this is FAQs. We've seen that a lot of people like to have the question and answer directly within their previews for an FAQ entity preview. This basically allows you to expand how much of this question or answer should appear in the FAQ entity previews. So I guess now bringing it back to our menu item here, we already have the name field emphasized. So I'm actually going to keep this as is, but going down the list here for our menu category, since name's a little bit long, it kind of like pushing up at the end of like the content here. So I'm actually going to use an alias here to shorten this name a little bit and just call this field category. One thing to note here is that for multilingual accounts, we also do support in-platform translations on these fields if you provide those translations to us. To add a translation for whatever you put in for this alias, you can simply click this blue link here to add a translation. I'm going to hit apply there to save that. The pricing category, the price and calories fields I'll actually leave as is, but for my list of allergens, I'm actually going to go ahead and expand the line height here to 2, just in case there's a longer list of allergens. Before I hit apply there, one thing I want to call out is that you'll also see that we have some additional display options here, which allow us to, which are specific to list fields and allow us to show and hide this list count and list values, depending on, what is more or less important for a given entity type. In our case, it's more important to see like the list of values. I'm less, worried about the actual count of allergens and more worried about like the specific allergens contained within the menu item. So I'm going to go ahead and hide the list count from this to, give more space to that content and then hit apply. And you'll see that the preview of our entity preview updates accordingly. So now that's all configured, I'm going to go ahead and hit save to apply those changes. And then I'll go ahead and return to my entity search page to see those changes in effect. And now you'll see that in the entity search page itself, you'll see a pretty significant difference in how easy it is to now see the information the most important information about my menu items that I want to see upfront on the screen versus before we just had like the name and entity IDs, and you kind of have to your users would have to go and click into each entity to get more details about that entity. This just makes the knowledge graph, again, much easier to navigate for field users, again, saving them time and enhancing that experience. So now that you've seen me configure entity previews, I'm going to give you a few minutes to log into your own respective accounts and try this out yourselves. So feel free to try this on any entity type of your choosing within your accounts. And just as a quick reminder to recap all the steps that I just took in that demo, to navigate to the preview configuration screen, once you've logged in, go ahead and click on the configuration tab underneath the knowledge graph main tab here. From there, once you're in the manage entity type screen, just search for the entity type that you want to configure a preview for, and go and view the details of that entity type. From there, once you're in that entity type configuration screen, you can go ahead and click the preview tab, which should take you to that preview configuration UI. So I'm going to give a moment here and just allow folks to take a second to do that.
One thing that and thank you so much for that, Fed. One thing that I want to bring up here, because we've got a question about it in the chat, is how does this look to the customer side of the site? I want to reiterate that this is purely internal. This is a tool to help save administrators time, help make the experience in the Yext platform better. So making any changes now inside of your platform is not going to have any sort of impact on any external facing information. It's not going to make it any different for clients, people on your website or anything like that. Fed, do you want to pop back into the platform quickly and just like go through the steps maybe one more time in a little bit of a faster motion, just in case anyone's following along? And one other thing that sorry, Fed. And one other thing that I'm going to mention is that we will again be recording this. So if you don't have enough time to go through it now, you can always pop back to the recording later, and Fed will take you through the quick step-by-step.
Yeah, just a quick step-by-step, just a quick recap. Here to get to that entity preview configuration screen, you simply click the configuration tab at the top here, top nav, find the entity type that you want to configure a preview for, so the menu item, view the details of that entity type, and then go ahead and go over to the preview tab for that entity type, and now you're in that screen.
We've got one question while we're waiting here, Fed. Can the photo width be adjusted in the previews?
Great question. So yeah, great question. So there's a couple, actually, I didn't actually dive into this, but I can actually go into this real quick. So the photo field, for the photo field that's contained within the entity preview, the actual space that it takes up in the preview is fixed. But that being said, if you have like photos that aren't necessarily like square shaped, then we do have some display settings specific to images that allow you to either fill or fit the image into like the allotted fixed space. So if you want to fit the full photo on a misshapen, like on a non-square, photo to fit like within the space of an image preview, you can set that setting to fit. And you'll see that we'll just kind of fill whatever is left with white space within the entity preview.
Awesome. All right, let's keep moving here so that we can get to some Q&As at the end. I've already seen some great ones come in, so appreciate that. The next thing that I wanted to point out is just to show what's next with the Hitchhikers program. I would say the first thing that you all should do, if it's not check out this webinar again and work on updating your entities, is actually putting your skills to the test and earning your knowledge graph badge. If you're able to access the self-service learning and the Hitchhikers platform, which you all should be able to, if you're not signed up, it's free. And then you'll be able to learn a little bit more about the entity previews, and you can check it out in writing, since we know everyone learns a little bit differently. Fed, do you want to click up a couple slides, please? And one more. And then, yeah, the last thing to mention is just that We've got a number of Hitchhikers events coming up, including office hours. So if you wanted to talk more about this, feel free to bring it up. And we've also got some more exclusive events around more specific features like this one to make our power users' lives easier, to help you to use the platform, to help you to reach your customers in a different way. So expect more content like this in the future, and definitely check out the events because we've got a number of great ones coming up this month. And with that, I will turn it over to some Q&A. So just as a reminder here, if you want to ask a question, pop it into the Q&A box. And we've got a few here so we can get started. The first question, we've got this a couple times, Fed, is where would you start if you don't have any entity previews set up yet? Are there any best practices for someone new to this?
Great question. So for some of our built-in types, we actually do provide default entity previews so that, right out of the box, you have configurations set up already for your entity previews. For custom entity types, that being said, for custom entity types, currently there's no, the default is that you will start off with that name and entity ID, like simple preview that I showed in the beginning. And then from there, you can kind of adjust the previews, as you wish. In a future, and actually like a upcoming monthly release, we're actually going to be releasing the ability to configure entity previews via the config as code platform with one of the next monthly releases. And with that, that'll basically enable users to our accounts to be able to effectively, apply templated entity previews to their account. We'll probably include some like solution templates and whatnot, so to make some like other pre-configured previews available for folks.
Awesome. When you're setting up these entity previews as an account manager, is it automatically going to apply those changes to all users, or will it depend on user permissioning?
No, that is correct. Yeah. So when you set up a new configuration as like an account manager, these changes will apply and show for all users within the account, no matter what the user permissions are. Yeah. So like the previews will be consistent for every user that is in the account.
Awesome. And would one of the fields that you can show, we're getting asked specifically about open close status, is that something that we can showcase with an entity preview?
Yeah, that is. It's I know that there is a built-in close field within the location entity type, and that field is definitely eligible to be included in an entity preview. Basically, any field that lives on your entity types with very, very, very few exceptions can be added to an entity preview.
Cool. Are you able to access entity preview configurations through the command line?
Great question. Yeah. So great question. That will be very soon, very soon. So, I believe it's with the October monthly release when that comes, we'll be giving folks the ability to configure entity previews through config as code. So with that, you should be able to apply previews through the command line, apply pre-configured previews via solution templates, etc.
Awesome. Are there any fields that can't be added, or I guess shouldn't be added to entity previews?
Yeah, another great question. So there are a small number of fields that can't be added, and these are mainly like certain publisher specific listings, fields like GMV attributes that can't really be added to entity previews. There are, in terms of like fields that we do not recommend to be added, I definitely say just fields that will add a lot of clutter to the knowledge graph. Like if you're making you're setting all your fields to like the max line height and they're all like full of content and whatnot, might not be the best candidate for like a entity preview necessarily. But outside of that, any field you want can, outside of the small number of like certain like publisher specific fields, can be added to entity previews.
Great. Is there anywhere else in the platform where these entity previews will affect how you view the entities?
Yes, great question. So right now, entity previews are currently used in entity search and knowledge graph, which is the screen that I showed. And if you're an answers customer, there also will appear in your answers test search as well. So, like if you the test search that you use to test your answers configurations, you'll see previews, entity previews represent, the entities that would display for results in your answers experiences in the test search in platform. Outside of that, those are the only two places currently where entity previews appear in the Yext platform, and there are definitely going to be more to come.
Great. We've got one. Is the feature available for specific built-in roles?
Great. That's a good question. So the feature is available to all customers and all accounts, all roles and whatnot. If you have the permission to manage entity types for the account, then you have the permission to, adjust the previews for the account. That being said, there is no ability to assign different specific previews to specific user roles yet. That is on the roadmap. That might come down the line. But at this point in time, we only allow one preview per entity type.
Great. We've got a couple of Hitchhikers questions that I can take here. What can Hitchhikers look forward to by earning badges? Hitchhikers can actually, once you get your badges, you can share them socially, which we've found is very popular. You're able to showcase, I'm a knowledge graph expert. I've finished the answers administrator curriculum. You can also level up, and there are different benefits depending on what level you are. We're kind of always thinking about how we can revamp the system, but hopefully you all enjoy doing some learning. And then the next question is, I used to be a certified Yext marketing partner. Is Hitchhikers an extension of that position with Yext? I would say yes, for the most part. We want Hitchhikers to be the one-stop shop for all customers, partners, anyone who wants to learn about Yext to learn more. There are some partner-specific things that you would work with our partner team on outside of Hitchhikers. But I do think like being Hitchhikers should be helpful to just about any partner or customer or anyone who really wants to learn about Yext. All right, I think that is all the questions that we had today. Definitely, please reach out to us if you have any questions. You can reach out to us through the community, join our office hours, anything like that. But I appreciate all the questions and all the interaction. And I want to also thank our co-hosts, Dan and Fed, for doing a great job showcasing the platform, showcasing this new feature and why it's so valuable. I hope that everyone has a nice day and expect the recording to be in your inboxes in the next 24 hours or so. Thank you again.